I'm standing in line to get through airport security, and I'm buzzing because I'm 3/4 of the way through writing the best song I've ever written in my life. I started writing it 2 days ago. The first line of the song is, I haven't felt this good in years. And it's true, I haven't. So I'm brainstorming ideas for the song's second pre-chorus, but there's a couple in front of me having the most inane argument I've ever heard. She's insisting that each person, we're going through airport security, remember? She's insisting that each person gets to use one plastic bin to put all their stuff in to go through the scanner. And he's like, yeah, but your laptop has to go in a separate bin from your bag. And she's like, no, one bag, one bin, one person, your bag, and I'm just like, oh my God. So, and I'm trying to come up with this lyric. So I pull out my earphones, and as I fumble with my iPod to drown them out, the lyric lands in my lap. Turn my music loud so I don't have to hear the voices. 6 months earlier, my wife, Dora, and I were in Sweden for the midsummer holiday. In Sweden, the city's empty for the weekend as people decamp to the countryside to celebrate the summer solstice. We've been invited by Magnus and Christopher, two of my favorite musicians, with whom my years-long email correspondences have recently become real-life friendships. Christopher is the proprietor of the Aerosol Grey Machine, a beautiful all-analog recording studio in a big barn beside his house, an hour from Malmö in southern Sweden. Christopher plays guitar in the band Roxette. And he produces their albums, and I'm a big fan of his indie band, who are called Brainpool. Magnus plays bass in Roxette, and sometimes tours in the Cardigans, who have also recorded at this studio. The weather is warm and balmy, perfect for this elaborate midsummer picnic that takes place in Christopher's garden. There's around 20 people of all ages there for midsummer, and although we know none of them, they make us feel very welcome, and they make an effort to speak to us in English. There's a smorgasbord of traditional Swedish cuisine: meatballs, pickled herring, mashed potatoes, and lingonberry jam, all washed down with Swedish beer and schnapps. After lunch, Christopher and Magnus don guitars in the late afternoon sun and lead everyone through a bunch of Swedish folk songs that we've never heard. And we dance around a hastily produced maypole adorned with flowers and bows. By the evening, we're sitting in the control room of the studio listening to records. Christopher gives me a tour of the studio, and this place is seriously old school. 2-inch tape machines, a huge vintage recording console, purpose-built echo chambers to create reverb. This is how they used to make records in the 70s. That night, more than a dozen of us drunkenly pour into a one-bedroom bungalow on the edge of the property, which is called the Gubenshus, or Old Man's House, in honor of its former resident. We arrange ourselves on mattresses everywhere to sleep off the day's shenanigans. As we leave the next day, Christopher's very generous offer rings in my head. Come back and do some recording any time. I offer mates rates. After returning home, Dora nudges me. You should go, she says. How often do you get the chance to make a record with your musical heroes? She's right. I send Christopher an email, and before I know it, I have a week of studio time booked for the following January with Magnus on bass and Christopher's bandmate Jens on drums. Shit, I need to write some songs. I am the world's least prolific songwriter. It's been 6 years since I independently released my second album, and in that time I have written approximately 5 songs. That is less than 1 song per year. So I get to work on creating some new songs that speak to where I'm at, and to my delight and relief, they're the best songs I've written. Especially the one that I was rushing to finish in the airport that day, the day before this week of recording sessions begins. I arrive at the studio, and Christopher and Jens are setting up the drum kit, arranging microphones around it and checking how it sounds in the control room speakers. The studio's main room is the center of the barn. The floors are covered in rugs, and the perimeter of the studio is lined with every kind of rock instrument you can think of. Bass guitars, acoustic guitars, Fender Stratocasters, Telecasters, Jazzmasters, all kinds of vintage keyboards, and not one, but 2 Hammond organs. The place smells of old wood and music. Before I know it, Christopher says, okay, let's hear these songs. Christopher is not a fan of demo recordings. He wants to hear the song in its essence, the way it was conceived. So I sit on a stool in the middle of the studio while Magnus, Christopher, and Jens sit on chairs 12 feet away from me, and I proceed to play them half a dozen songs on my acoustic guitar. I'm self-conscious and a little nervous, but I'm excited too because I'm here in Sweden with these musical giants, and the smiles I'm seeing as I play tell me that they like the songs and we're going to have fun this week. Okay, Christopher says, let's start with that one, the one I just played. It's called Come Tomorrow. It's the song I was still writing in the airport, the song I started writing 3 days ago. The lyrics aren't quite finished, I tell him. No problem, he says. We won't record the vocals until later in the week. Okay, great, let's do it. Magnus picks up his bass, Jens sits down at his drum kit, and I start to teach them the song. And after one pass through the song, I realize that not only do they know it, but they can play it better than me. It took me 5 minutes to become the weakest link in this chain. But that doesn't matter. I just have to concentrate and play my best and not freak out that this is happening. Bless you. We start running through the song together as Christopher tinkers with guitar amplifier sounds. And much too soon for my comfort level, we hear his voice on the studio talkback saying, "Ready, guys?" And that's it. The red light's on. Jens counts us in, and we start recording. And we're working fast. By lunchtime, we finish the bed tracks. That's the guitar, bass, and drums for Come Tomorrow. And we finish another song after lunch. Christopher's wife, Ulva, makes a delicious dinner, and then I'm off to the Gubbenshuis to prepare for the next day and get some rest. I've never had an experience like this before. In the past, when I've recorded, I've mostly done it at home by myself. I do a guitar track, answer some emails, walk the dog, maybe think about some lyrics. Here I'm completely immersed in this creative project. It's full on, and I need to bring my A game if I'm going to keep up with these guys. But more than that, it's one of the most fulfilling and joyful experiences of my life. After 3 days, we've recorded the bed tracks to half a dozen songs, and Magnus and Jens leave Christopher and I to record vocals and to start thinking about arrangements. That's the extra embellishments that each song is going to have. This is where the beauty of Christopher truly reveals itself. The studio is like an extension of his body and his mind. He could make a record blindfold. And he's a multi-instrumentalist. Like, he plays everything. We're working on my song Trouble, and Christopher says, "Hey, how about a little flute on this track?" He pulls down the condenser microphone he keeps hung over the mixing desk for moments such as this. He grabs his flute from its stand, enables the track on the tape machine, hits record, and improvises the most beautiful flute part in one take. This went from inspiration to execution in under 3 minutes. Another time we're working on a song called Half a World Away, and he says, "I have an idea for the backing vocals on this song." And I sit giggling in the corner as he records his voice on 3 separate tracks, flawlessly sketching out a perfect 3-part harmony backing vocal that we'll later record with the 2 of us and Magnus singing. "Some of these songs are crying out for string arrangements," says Christopher. "Would you like me to write some cello and violin parts?" "Probably, yeah," I tell him. "But there's this one guy I have to approach first. I know of this chap in London. His name's Robert Kirby. He's a legend. He's worked with Elvis Costello, John Cale, and Elton John. And more importantly, he arranged the strings on Nick Drake's records." Nick Drake? Anybody? Oh, awesome, thank you. For those of you who don't know him, Nick Drake was a singer-songwriter who died in obscurity in 1974, having produced 3 albums that almost no one heard. But he's since acquired a sort of cult-like following. I had some minor contact with Robert when I organized a Nick Drake tribute night a Nick Drake tribute concert in Toronto several years ago. It was a fundraiser, and I contacted people who'd been involved in Nick's career to finagle raffle prizes out of them, and Robert had kindly obliged. I still have his email address. Let me see if I can send him a disc of some rough mixes. So I send Robert an email that night, and I tell him about these songs in the studio in Sweden. And he quickly replies, "Sure, send me a disc, and I'll let you know if I feel I can contribute something," which felt a little bit like he was already leaving the back door open. So after I returned home, I sent him the disc, and I waited. And I waited. And I waited. The follow-up recording sessions were still months away, but I was about to give up and tell Christopher to go ahead and write some string parts, when one afternoon, I'm listening to my voicemails, and I hear an unfamiliar voice say, "Hello, Luke, it's Robert Kirby here. I'm so sorry it's taken me so long to get back to you. I've been up to my ears in the BBC Electric Proms, but I love the songs, and I've got ideas for this song and that song and this song, and holy fucking shitballs!" I almost dropped the phone. "Dora, come here. You have to hear this message. Robert Kirby is going to arrange and conduct a string section on my new album." Months later, I'm at the airport again, this time en route to London to pick up Robert Kirby and fly into Christopher's studio. We land at Copenhagen Airport and rent a car to drive across the bridge over the Baltic Sea to Malmo, where we stop for provisions. I need to feed Christopher Robert and the 9 string players from the Malmo Opera Orchestra, who Christopher has booked for this session. I'm planning a smorgasbord of my own, so we stop at a brilliant cheese shop and deli in Malmo called Mollen's Ost. We walk into the shop, and by chance, they're playing Nick Drake's 5 Leaves Left album on the stereo. Robert shoots me a look. "You cheeky bugger, you set this up, didn't you?" Of course I hadn't. The Swedes just have impeccable taste in music. So Robert couldn't help but going up to the counter and declaring himself. "Excuse me," he says, these are my string arrangements we're listening to. I wrote these." The guy behind the counter is clearly skeptical. "Yeah, right," he says. So Robert pulls out his passport, and after cross-checking the passport with the CD booklet, the shopkeeper has this Nick Drake CD signed by Robert Kirby, and I get 20% off like $250 worth of bread, meat, and cheese. It's already starting to feel a bit magical. Onwards to Christopher's, and we spend a lovely evening eating, drinking, and listening to Robert's fascinating stories of life in the London music scene of the 1970s. We round out the night at opposite ends of the dining room table in the Gubenshuis. Robert putting the finishing touches to his handwritten scores, and me making a large English trifle for dessert the next day. When we arrive at the studio in the morning, the musicians are already there. Christopher has been busy setting up the live room with microphones, stools, music stands, and headphones. Enough for 4 violins, 2 violas, 2 cellos, and a double bass. Often, classical musicians can struggle a bit when they're thrown into a pop or rock recording environment which requires a little looseness and swing. But Christopher has worked many times with the lead violinist Thomas, who's brought 8 players who have experience with this kind of work. They settle into the live room, all tuning their instruments at once, which sounds like an orgy of dying cats. Robert is seated at a music stand facing the players, his conducting baton in hand. Where am I? I'm in the corner, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible, holding my video camera, because this is a moment I want to keep forever. Most string arrangers will work with a keyboard and a computer, a keyboard to bring their ideas to life, and a computer to capture it. And then they'll render their music as PDF sheet music for the musicians. Not Robert. Robert is old school. He doesn't like computers, and he never thought himself a good enough pianist to do his ideas justice. He would just listen to the unadorned track over and over and over again until the ideas started to percolate. Then he would sit at his dining room table with a sheet of music manuscript paper and a pencil, and he would write the music he heard in his head. All these musicians are sitting looking at sheets of handwritten manuscript. Nobody has heard a single note of this music outside of Robert's head, not until this moment, this first run-through. I click record on my camera, and the bows all hit the strings for the first time, and the room comes alive with beautiful music, like the clouds parting and letting brilliant sunshine in through the roof of the studio. I'm trying to capture the moment on video, but at the same time be in the room and not just experiencing it entirely through the camera lens. And the kicker is that every available headphone socket that Christopher has is already in use. So I'm not hearing the recorded track of the song that everyone's playing along to. I'm just hearing the strings. And of course I recognize what they're playing along to at first, but then the arrangement takes a turn and I'm suddenly lost. I have no clue what they're playing over. I try to maintain my composure and keep the camera trained on the players and Robert, panning back and forth across the room to get everyone in. The song finishes, and we hear Christopher on the studio talkback, instructing us to come into the control room and listen. So the 11 of us pile in there and sit around as Christopher rewinds the tape and lets us hear it. And I hear it for the first time. This gorgeous string arrangement that is adorning my song. I realize I've had a knot in my stomach for the last half hour, and it slowly unclenches itself as I start to relax for the first time. I'm elated. I'm overwhelmed. But I also slowly figure out that there's a darker feeling that I haven't yet confronted. I realize that I feel like a fraud. Here I am, working with these brilliant, well-established, heavyweight people. But I'm a nobody. I don't have a record label waiting to deliver this music to the world. I just have myself. What if I've gotten all these people out of bed for an album that gets heard by no one? But then I realize that they don't care whether I have a record deal or not. They're here because they heard something in my music that was worth getting out of bed for. and they're here working and playing at their best because they believe in me and they love my music. And so I have to believe in myself and try to take this music wherever I can get it to. I remember how sheepish I felt when Christopher first offered me studio time. Me? Record here with you? But I came to realize that this project was so much more than just me. When I listen to the album now, I hear this much of me and this much of everybody else. And when I play a song solo, like I'm about to, I still hear them in it, and I leave space in the song for everybody else. Magnus, Christopher, Jens, Robert, and those 9 string players from the Malmö Opera Orchestra.